if you're passionate about something, passionate about playing games like I am, like you not only should just have a chance to play these games, but I think if you're helping fund them, getting them discovered, being part of the community, which I would say is really, in a way, being a publisher. It's like being it's like a people's publisher. In that way, you're bringing profit to the people.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Profit to the People, the official podcast of Republic, where we believe you have the power to invest in the future you believe in. I'm your host, Lisa Carmen Wang, and I'll be taking you behind the scenes to meet the team, founders, and investors in our community who share their insights on the future of investing and how they're bringing profit back to the people. To learn how you can get started investing, head over to republic.co and follow us on all socials at Join Republic and at Lisa Carmen Wang. Today, I am here with Justin Bailey, the founder of Fig, the leading video game publisher that pioneered a new and better way to fund and develop video games. Fig was acquired by Republic in 2020 to bring one of the most sought-after investment opportunities to our community. In the traditional model, a small group of executives at big companies decide which games get made. But on Fig, fans and individual investors help make the call on which games get funded. Then investors are rewarded with a portion of that revenue depending on how successful the game is. Since 2015, investors on Fig have successfully funded more than 40 games and have been paid out an impressive $6.4 million so far. Returns on individual investments have reached as high as 300%, and Fig has enjoyed 3 straight years of positive returns. Today, Justin is here to talk to us about his journey and the future of gaming investments. As a little bit of background, he previously served as the chief operating officer and board member of Double Fine Productions, a game studio that was acquired by Microsoft. He also helped fund and publish a variety of games, including the BAFTA Best Game of the Year, Outer Wilds, the relaunch of Grim Fandango by Sony, which was one of the highest rated games of all time, and What the Golf, which recently won Best Mobile Game of the Year by IGN and one of the launch titles for Apple Arcade. Justin, so excited to have you here. Welcome to Profit to the People.
Cool. Thanks, Lisa. It's great to be here.
To get us started, could you tell us about how you got into video games and at what point did you realize that you could make a business out of it?
Yeah, I mean, it started early on. Like when I was 14, I actually worked at Babbage's. Like I remember riding my bike, and that store now got, bought out. It's part of like EB Games. And then I went on and started doing a career in finance. But my love of games like never left me. And so, I went through my career doing the kind of financial software, and there was an opportunity at one point in time where I was getting involved in media entertainment and doing merger and acquisitions, like the post-merger integration of studios with a company called Liberty Media. And I saw an opportunity to leverage that background to get into games. And so I joined Namco Bandai. They're the creators of Pac-Man and Tekken and Soul Calibur. And I was actually supposed to integrate in a studio they're going to buy, a studio called Bottle Rocket. They're working on The Flash, and they're working on a game called Splatterhouse for us. They're going to remake it. And for those like really like in like that follow the industry, Brash was this publisher that ended up going belly up, and it took a lot of studios with them. And so, long story short, first day on the job, I get there, and they're like, "Hey, so that studio we're supposed to acquire, and you were gonna bring into the fold, they just went bankrupt. So we're actually going to be taking a U-Haul on there and grabbing the PCs and stuff." And so basically they're like, "Well, what are we going to do with this guy?" And they said, the Greenlight Committee for video games, sometimes you can spend upward 20 million plus at that time. This is back early 2000s. And they said it's basically like acquiring a studio. So why don't we make him head of the Greenlight Committee? And so I kind of came in sideways. But it was through that experience when I got in the game industry, and running that Greenlight Committee that I was always looking for, is there a way to plug into gamers directly and find a way, what they liked, as opposed to just this small, group of people, trying to figure it out.
So when you talk about what it is that they like, these gamers, how is there a disconnect between the executives, the small group of people who decide what games are made and the people who are actually playing the games, at what point did you see, oh, there's an opportunity in this disconnect?
I saw it almost immediately. The technology exists to get consumer feedback, like once you play a game, right? So, back when I started the game industry at like 14, like, creators they'd create a game and they just ship it off. And then they wouldn't even know for, 2, 3 months, like how well the sales were doing. Fast forward to today, like it's pretty common that you have a day zero patch. Like you've shipped the game, you already know you're going to patch it. And then you get this whole plethora of data to see what gamers like about the game and, potentially where you should expand it, maybe like when you're making the sequel, like the parts that gamers enjoyed the most. But it really wasn't until crowdfunding kind of took hold that you saw an opportunity to figure out what consumer sentiment would be, and specifically gamers, on a game that was, sometimes even just at concept stage. And that was one thing that was really special about Double Fine that I saw. I'd served on the Greenlight committee for Namco Bandai. I joined another publisher after that, was actually head of their mergers and acquisitions and also their Greenlight committee. And that's actually when the Double Fine Adventure launched on Kickstarter, and they raised, multiple millions. And before that, successful campaigns were only doing like 100,000. They ended up finishing with like 100,000 backers, or it was really close to that. And I was just like, oh wow, well that just shows us something. And it opened my eyes because specifically among people that led Greenlight committees, and there's a handful of us in the industry, we all thought adventure games were dead. And, to see like this complete outpouring of consumers, just saying, hey, we'd love to see an adventure game by this creator, Tim Schafer. That just really showed me, hey, there's an opportunity now to plug those gamers into this process.
That's awesome. And were you doing, call it user research from the very beginning? Were you constantly in communication with these gamers, like asking them what they wanted?
Yeah, well, and that's the other part is like in the publishing side, we'd have focus groups, right? And you'd bring them in and you kind of see how their reaction was to the game. You pay people for that, right? Or you give them some kind of incentive. In this case, it was crazy because you're able to tap into it and see what the consumer sentiment is very early on, but they're paying you, funds actually go to the development of a game. And I mean, there's nothing that speaks more to a creator than somebody who's willing to put forward funds to develop a game that's at a concept stage and that they potentially won't even get a play for like 2 to 3 years. That is a very strong market signal that, these people want to play this game. And usually what we've found out, and this is doing some research, is, we found it's indicative of a larger group. So if you have people that will plop down, $50 to play a game that doesn't even exist yet 2 years before it's made, then, it's generally about 10 times that what you'll see as far as when it releases, which, it's very interesting in and of itself.
And can you tell me about the evolution of gaming? Just give us a little bit of background. Like personally, I played GoldenEye back in the day, so kind of retro, but that's like the extent of my experience there. Mario Kart. But yeah, walk us a bit through the history and just like where we were then and where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, the Atari started it, right? You can go back like this, like 1970s, and this is a little before my time. But one of the first like commercially successful games would be Pong. Came out. Interestingly enough, I think it's the 50th anniversary of that next year. I had to look that up, and it was like November of next year's 50th anniversary. It's crazy. From there, you had a nice like 10 really strong years at Atari. There was the video game Crash. I believe it was the like 1983, 1984 timeline. At that time, then you saw Nintendo really come on the scene. And they kind of picked up where Atari left off. And then from that era, then you saw other consoles really pick up. You had Sony and Microsoft jumping in the fray. Sega was there for a while. It's kind of sad. Their consoles are beloved by enthusiasts, but they're no longer. They really didn't survive past the first couple of generations. So there's some really interesting documentaries like talking about the Atari crash, and that actually go on to talk through like Nintendo and Sony, and Nintendo, Sega, and Sony facing off even before Microsoft got in. There was there was another era that kind of like that split off from there, where computer gaming was like, really kind of had the player base split into two. You had by far a much bigger console crowd, and then you had the PC gamers as well. Those two kind of in the 80s and 90s progressed, relatively independent of each other. And then when you saw consoles like the Xbox 360 and PS2 come out, that generation, those two groups started to merge, and you basically saw, the PC gamers and console gamers all become one, and kind of a big happy family that we see today.
It's awesome. And one of the things I think in particular that's interesting about the video game industry is that it's proven itself to be resilient against economic downturns. And that is something that makes it even more desirable for investors. We've seen that through COVID, as the industry shot up. Where do you see it now? And like what has transformed over this last year?
Yes, it is reverse recessionary in a way. When people are looking with COVID, when you can't go anywhere, it's great to take a virtual vacation. But in general, when it's harder, when money becomes tighter, people will splurge on, Starbucks would be an example of another reverse recessionary one. People will splurge more on coffees, they'll also splurge more on games. So that's pretty helpful. I will say one thing, which is interesting about the game industry, is that it dances to its own beat in a way. I'm not saying the exact right phrase there, but if you look at the trend of it, it has a crash like every 10 years. And so that actual 1984 crash, like 83, 84, ended up repeating itself around 10 years later. And then again, 10 years after that. And so, and then we can also look at the console life cycles. They generally have about a 10-year life cycle. So we can actually start to map how the industry is going to behave. Interestingly enough, those kind of crashes end up being periods of consolidation. And in a weird way, we actually went through a period of consolidation, which just happened. And so that's why there's been a flurry of acquisitions. As a matter of fact, Fig started with 5 advisory studios. Double Fine, my previous employer, and In Exile, Obsidian, Harmonix, which is the creators of Rock Band, and Gearbox, which is the creators of Borderlands. Of those, in the last year, about actually 4 of them have been acquired, and only one left, and that's Harmonix with that created Rock Band. So.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it seems almost similar just in media in general, where, you used to have these like major networks, and then there was a splitting off as you had these niche media networks. And now we're starting to see that consolidation as well. So it seems like all of it is pretty cyclical.
Yeah, it is. But the fact that it's off cycle with the rest of the economy is something of interest with the reverse recessionary nature. So I believe the term used like the fund managers as non-correlative, which is, you want that because you want the diversity, the diversification. One other thing I would say, which I wanted to come back to, is with the crowdfunding tapping into the community. One thing you see is, you get a direct signal from those consumers. But the thing I did mention, and I think it plays into our conversation here about this period of consolidation, is it's been about 10 years now that these major publishers, the development costs have gone up to about 100 million for a lot of these titles. And they can't afford to take their risk taking. Like any kind of creative risk taking has gone way down. And so what you are seeing from crowdfunding sources is you're seeing new IP emerge from that. Whereas in the majority of titles actually being funded by these publishers are sequels. We actually referred to this as sequelitis, as a problem with the industry. And if you want to map it to another entertainment industry, it looks about like what the film industry looked 40 years ago when it was going, and you had like Cleopatra and stuff. You had these big like set pieces that were happening like on the studio lot, and then you saw at that time you actually saw a new way of financing that created like these auteurs that went out, shot on location, shot these cheaper budgets, but they took a huge amount of creative risk taking, and that's actually the birth of film financing, and that's kind of what we see potentially happening here with Fig. Is Fig an opportunity, one of the first instances of game financing?
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting, and I think another thing that I find particularly cool about allowing individual investors to fund these games and be part of it is the ability to bring in more diverse creators, right? Getting more diverse creators funded that maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to get their games out into the world. So what are you doing to ensure that there is more diversity in some of the games that are being developed and funded?
Yeah, it's a great that is something that in the industry we've been paying particular attention to for the last 5 years. So as you can imagine, it's frustrating for us that it's predominantly white male when for its entertainment medium, and it's like we look at movies as another good example. Is like it has all ethnicities and all genders are interested in it. And one of the things we've been looking at is it's the funding of the content. And this sequelitis is actually part of the symptom that's existed there too, which is Tim Schafer. I used to work for him, and we always talked about this. The two of us together were just saying it's like Michael Bay. Like every game that comes out is a Michael Bay film, and that's a way to kind of compare it to Hollywood. Like you would if it was all superhero movies, and I think some people are like suggesting today it is all superhero movies, but if it is, that's not a diverse audience that you're going to attract. And so one of the things that we do is the genre diversification, and just looking at like they don't all have to be that style of. They can be comedies. Adventure games themselves are more narrative driven and story heavy. Like you just want those different genres, and to get there, you actually have to have new IP. And so that's one of the reasons why crowdfunding in general and this idea of doing project financing allows many different creators to be enabled to show their vision and do so in something that potentially doesn't fit with the current funding framework that exists.
That's awesome. Is there a typical even age where you see people getting into video game creation?
I'm trying to think about so I think people are doing it, they don't know it. I'd say around 8 to 12 is the age group I see. My daughters are both gamers. I mean, no surprise, but they make really intricate Minecraft worlds, and in a way, they're designing their own games already. They're world building, right? You see that Roblox just went IPO this year, and they're doing well. Not today, because today is bad for everybody, but for the most part. But there's a lot of games that people are playing where they actually are creators themselves, and you start to see that emerge. I mean, you even have Minecraft camps. That'll happen this summer. You'll see people doing that and creating worlds. Scratch. You're seeing that in a lot of like grade schools as like the first introduction to programming. And I just think it's amazing to look at what some of these younger individuals are coming up with. So.
Yeah. I mean, and like gaming is the ultimate like metaverse, right? Like it's been there forever. And now these days we're talking about, buying digital land, and like you've been able to do that forever on the virtual world and the gaming world. So, I mean, a lot has happened this year, and I know you're also involved in like NFT space and blockchain space. Where do you see those worlds colliding with the gaming industry?
Yeah, it's really interesting because from the outside looking at like the use case, if you're looking from the blockchain NFT side and looking at games, you're like, it's the perfect use case. But then if you look at the game side, these like with MMOs, you've had these persistent worlds and items for a long time. So it might actually be a laggard as far as adoption goes. I think looking to when they'll merge is when it's less about the technology. I have seen in blockchain, sometime you have people are so enthusiastic about it, and they've made a lot of money. So you have these blockchain enthusiasts coming in, sometimes inflating prices. You can get a false positive, I think, from that. And I think with game developers and game players, like they're not really interested as much in that. Like what they're interested in is the gameplay experience. So what I see happening in this space is I see like potentially blockchain being more an enabling technology, and people not even knowing, like gamers not even knowing it's there. And then some really cool use cases showing up where, somebody has an NFT in a game that has utility, and they can take that NFT and it can actually have utility in another game, but also has independent value. And so, you have that object permanence happening with these digital items. Once that happens more organically, I think you'll see it being picked up and specifically being driven outside of kind of the crypto blockchain community.
I like that you reemphasize the gaming experience because I think too often when people are bringing up NFT blockchain, like in a very faddish way, it's like just to emphasize it. But I think it's really smart to think about it as how do we turn it into a seamless experience? Like it's the technology and the infrastructure being integrated there, but it's always about first and foremost the experience of the gamers themselves.
Yeah, thanks.
So I want to go then to the expansion of FIG in terms of covering new areas where people can start fundraising. So this year, one of the first post-acquisition campaigns was Intellivision Amico, the console. Tell me a bit about how that came to be and how that campaign went.
It was funny because Chuck, who also works at Republic and heads up FIG right now, we met in Las Vegas before the whole COVID lockdown, and we were at it's called DICE, and it was like what was the last conference I went to before the shutdown, and so obviously haven't been back since. But we were talking to Tommy, who's the head of Intellivision Amico, and planning as our first campaign. So that's how it came about. One thing that I loved about Republic, and I thought it was a good home for FIG, is that Republic has these relationships already with these private investor groups. You guys call them publishers, and in the game industry, like we think of publishers as like EA, Activision, and THQ, and other like huge publishers. But so I saw a lot of potential in the idea of opening these opportunities up, getting exposure to these private investor groups, and so that actually happened with Intellivision Amico. Raised $12 million. One thing that we'd love to do is get the word out there more in the game industry because it was hugely successful, and we haven't really talked about our success as much. And so, but that potential that we have to tap into those investment groups in the future with games has us excited about another initiative at FIG that we're working on.
Awesome. So, let's talk a bit more about the success, right? And what are some of the games that have funded through FIG? We talked a bit just at the very beginning about the, investors have seen up to 300% return on one of the games.
Yeah, that was an interesting one because it's brand new IP, right? And they came to us. They just wanted to raise a small amount of money. It's like something like $50,000. And we ended up raising $150,000 for them. And the game was about to launch later that year. It actually ended up, the campaign was successful, but the game ended up selling exclusive pre-orders to this firm called GOG, Good Old Games. And then it sold a subscription service and then exclusive for later on. Anyway, the game paid itself off to investors before it even launched, which was pretty crazy. And then I think it's gone on to make something like $10 million in revenue, which was equally insane. So at that time, we'd agreed to a cap. And one of the reasons we'll talk about this, I think one of the next questions you're going to ask, we're going to talk about this dynamic. But if the cap wasn't there, it would have made a lot more money for investors. And there is actually a way that I've talked to developers and asked, what situations they'd be more comfortable with, like agreeing to terms that didn't include a cap. So investors could have that complete upside.
Yeah.
So that's one of them. You mentioned some of the other ones in the introduction. Obviously, we had the BAFTA award-winning Game of the Year, Outer Wilds. That was the first game we ever funded. We did have What the Golf, which was also seen on the Epic Game Store. It was on PC, also on mobile. Very talented team there. And then we had another game called Phoenix Point, which is by the creator of XCOM. That ended up actually launching. Was one of the launch titles for the Epic Game Store. Epic, of course, the creator of Fortnite. So we have seen, we've seen a lot of success with both developers, their games, for investors, and for these storefronts that popped up in the last 3-4 years.
Talk to us a bit more about the cap. Just explain how that is working for investors and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, we've had a lot of them cap out. We've even had a lot of games. Outer Wilds is actually an example of a game that We sold the rights, our revenue share rights to that about 9 months after we signed it to Annapurna. And so that made, I think it was 270% just in a few months for its investors. It was also a capped deal. So in general, when a developer comes to me and says, I'd like to do a campaign, we say, they're like, how much can we raise? And the answer is, we don't know, because when you do a straight up crowdfunding campaign, you obviously don't know what the reception is going to be. Like, the money hasn't been raised in advance. And so they take a chance on failure. Like failure that just doesn't resonate with the investors, or it's too soon, or any number of things that can actually happen. But if you come to developers with a pool of money beforehand, and you're very clearly able to outline some milestones that they achieve and that money will be unlocked for them, then there's a lot more confidence going in. And because of that, negotiation wise, you have more leverage. And so, and the game developers are fine agreeing to terms that give the investors more upside. In particular, it's like the investors are taking on more risk with that, right? Because the funds will be, they'll be allocated based on that criteria. But one of the things we've done, which is really nice, is over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been gathering data to try to figure this out and to de-risk it from both sides. De-risk the funding to the developers, which makes them okay agreeing to better terms, but we're actually de-risking the investment too, making a chance to be a more successful game. And so that de-risks the investors. And we do that through reducing the discovery problems that a lot of indie developers are facing today.
Awesome. So as we look forward in Fig and just the investors, what can people look forward to in terms of upcoming games?
Yeah, so upcoming games, for the most part, we're going to keep these a little under wraps. We will have some new indie games and some existing franchises that come out. But what you can look forward to is we're rolling out a new product called Portfolio Shares, and that was our most requested feature. We had people who came to the site, they invested in a game, they made their return. They're like, I get what this is all about. I'm totally in for it. Can I just write you a check? And you guys go out and just, go ahead and use that check, a portion of it, for each campaign. And so that's been asked like multiple times from multiple people. And so we're going to do it now. We're going to finally go ahead and raise what we call the portfolio shares. And that money all comes into this one big pot. And then all the games that then fund through Fig, investors will have participation in that.
Awesome. What about your personal mission? You've obviously been very successful to date in this industry, in your career. What is it that drives you, and what do you want to continue to accomplish on this journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the great game creators. Like, I remember when I worked for publishers, I thought the process was too stringent. I thought the game developers were bringing a lot of the value. And so, one of the creators of World of Warcraft, I was like having dinner with him early on. It was like 10 years ago. And like, I asked him, like, what do publishers need to do to be successful? And he was very frank in saying, what you guys need to do is get out of the way, find creators who can, make these games and try to enable them rather than, make them jump through so many hoops. And, of course, Blizzard was so successful. They had so much money that they could actually afford to take the time necessary to release a really quality game. And they did it over and over again. And so that's kind of what I've always tried to do, is like put myself in a position where I can enable creators, get them the funding they want, let them, they have the creative vision, stay out of their way, and just kind of add value where I can. And that kind of be the way that games get funded in the future. Because I think the games I've played that I truly enjoyed have had that creative freedom for those creating.
Yeah, I love that, because as a content creator myself, so many times it's just like we need space to get that vision out there, and have a lot of people who are in the way get out of the way, so you can really fully explore that vision.
Yeah, it's funny because like when I started I talk about that one company. It's called Bottle Rocket, and they had the Flash in that company, Brash, the publisher Brash. And the reason it probably went belly up, they were matching like movie IPs with game development and trying to sync them up with movies. with the release of the movie. And so, a lot of times they'd have like very strict, like 9-month development cycles. And that was just the worst thing possible for games. And like, if you could tie that back to, what sunk Atari was, commonly thought as ET, and then having to rush to get a game developed, in time to launch with the movie. And so, and then you look at the best games that have really ever come out. Like Minecraft and, in World of Warcraft. And, one thing they all have in common is they're really just given the time, the creator needed to really, find what was fun there and perfect it. And so, that's, I'd like to see a lot more than that, a lot fewer deadlines and a lot more freedom.
When we all. Last question for you. What does it mean to you to bring profit to the people?
Yeah, profit to the people. For me specifically, that's about gamers. And I just think, if you're passionate about something, passionate about playing games like I am, like you not only should just have a chance to play these games, but I think if you're helping fund them, getting them discovered, being part of the community, which I would say is really, in a way, being a publisher. It's like being it's like a people's publisher. In that way, you're bringing profit to the people.
Awesome. This was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing and enlightening all of us about the gaming industry, where it's been, where it's going, and super excited to see all that FIG it has to offer our community.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Lisa.
This podcast is provided for educational purposes only by Republic and Republic.co. Nothing discussed should be construed as legal, tax, accounting, or investment advice. The views of the presenters may not be the views of Republic and its affiliates. Always consult with trusted professional advisors before making investments. Private investments are inherently illiquid and may result in a total loss. All rights reserved.